Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another amazing episode of 52 Authors, 52 Weeks. Today, I am joined by Dr. Ebony Green, who is the author of the book Caregiving Things You Need to Know. Guys, you are in for a treat today because I know many of you are at that age where you're having to care for your parents and someone else. And there are so many things that you really need to know to help you thrive and survive in that space. So, welcome to the show, Dr. Green.
Thank you, Dr. Lisa. I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you. So, before we get into the book, we're not going to tell them everything that's in the book. They need to get their own copy. And really, it's a book, but to me, it's more like workbook, right?
Mhm.
Because you really force us to stop and think. And this is a topic that it's almost like in the life planning, people don't want to have this conversation.
Mhm.
But when you fall into a situation where you have to be the caregiver and you haven't thought about how you're going to navigate that, to me is worse. I would rather know.
Exactly. Exactly true.
So tell our listening and viewing audience about your background.
Sure. Again, Dr. Ebony Green. My background is I was a registered nurse, I still am, and my PhD is in healthcare administration. So my dream and goal was to become a long term care administrator way, way back. And I did that position for a very brief time and realized that that was not, after lots of college, realized that was not what I wanted to do and kind of fell into the caregiving space and helping caregivers. So, my husband and I are co founders of Caregiver Support Services, and we train family and frontline caregivers.
Wow. And you got hubby involved too?
Yes, ma'am.
Love it. So, for our listening viewing audience, I want to just reiterate that for 52 authors, 52 weeks, the author signs up on our website. They fill out a form. They schedule their recording session. Simultaneously, we go and purchase the book because we want to support all of the authors. But we don't have an opportunity to really get to know each other. We kind of get to know each other during the interview. So I want to share with you first my first fun fact that you may not know. So I was looking on your LinkedIn profile and saw that you attended Capella from 2004 to 2009. And coincidentally, I started at Capella in 2004, May to be exact. And I actually didn't finish until 2013 because there was a whole thing with my chair. But, we're not going to worry about what had happened. But do you remember that very first class that you had to take
Yeah.
that talked about aging?
Yes.
And so you're a younger person taking that class and it hits you years later. I mean, that was 2024. It's
Mhm.
2025, right? That's 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm 52. So 20 years ago, I was 32, right? So I
Yeah.
wasn't really thinking about being a caregiver to my parents. And so fast forward to today, it's real. So we have that in common. And you, like one of my other friends, Dr. Debbie Boyd Seal, you both graduated. She graduated in 2008. I called her up one day and was like, hey, you're going to go to school with me. I had already started. And she was like, what? I'm like, yeah. So I pulled her in. She went from 2004 to 2008. And we all graduated with that doctorate in human services with the
Mhm.
emphasis in healthcare administration. I don't even think they have that degree anymore. I think they call it a DHA.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm so glad that we got in on the PhD because I don't
Me
know if I want to
too.
be a DHA. No
Well,
shade,
it's
no
different.
shade.
Yeah, it's different. It's different.
Yes.
And the type of research and things that you're going to be exposed to at the PhD level is very different than what you'll be doing as a pro doc.
Yes, yes. So I know that you wrote this book for a reason outside of your work. Tell our listening, viewing audience your why for wanting to capture what I like to call such a sensitive topic.
So this goes back to the early 2000s, and it was actually before I started the PhD program at Capella. I started writing this book because at that time I was working in long term care, and I would see so many families that would need nursing home level of care and had no idea about the overall system, how things work within that structure. And so you're already facing emotional challenges associated with having to access long term care. And at that time, it was really more nursing home um, than what we would call now community based, where we're not trying to get people to go long term care. And families were just overwhelmed with the emotion, but also had no idea about the overall process and what happens when you have someone go to long term care and then they have to stay there after the Medicare episode ends. So that was my inspiration for writing it. And over the years, I have found that we still haven't done enough in that realm of educating folks before they face significant challenges with family members that they love.
I think that this is just one of those topics that people don't want to have the conversation about. Several weeks ago, I went to the county clerk office here in Illinois and filled out paperwork to basically transfer the title of this house that I'm in to my husband. Now, you may say, "Well, you're married. Why do you got to, transfer the title?" Well, I've lived in this house for 20 years before him and I got married. And I don't want there to be a situation where I leave before him because we're all going to die, right? That's just
Mhm.
reality. But I didn't want him to be in a situation where I go before him and now he's trying to fill out all this paperwork to get, remain in a house that he's lived in, for a significant amount of time, a place that he calls home. And so after I did my paperwork, I called my father and said, "Hey, Dad, I want to." First of all, I told him what I did. Right, I had my lead in, and I said, "Hey, I want to take you downtown to do the same paperwork. I think you should put it in my younger sister's name. She's the baby, right? She's like probably 20 years younger than me. So I'm like, put it in her name. I believe that's the house she grew up in, all that good stuff." And he was like, "Well, we'll see." And so then I'm like, "Oh, well, do you have do you have another plan in place?" Well, maybe. So, one of the things I recognize is that I think men handle end of life planning different than women. And it could be that they're just silent about their thoughts and we're more vocal. But in my mind, if you ain't talking about it, you're not thinking about it. That's just
Right, right, absolutely.
so. You talk about the what happens after Medicare. Talk a little bit more about that because I don't think that just went over people's head. They like, "What you talking about? I'm gonna be on Medicare. I'm gonna have Medicare till I die."
Well, Medicare doesn't pay for your long-term stays. Medicare pays for you to, so hospital, if you think about a hospital, we want to get you stabilized and we want to send you to wherever you call home. Sometimes you're not well enough, you're not recovered enough to go to your physical home. So then you'll go to an extended stay with Medicare. And then Medicare will pay 100% of your stay for, I think it's the first 30 days. And then after that, you have a copay that you're responsible for. But it's only up to that 100 days. So if you start to do well enough or you plateau, meaning you don't are not improving, then that means Medicare will no longer pay. And now you're on the hook for either applying for Medicaid, which would mean you wouldn't be able to keep your home in your name. That might be sold, or a lien placed on it. What I've seen is some family members will have mom was maybe a stay-at-home mom, and dad had a physical job, so his social security is the thing that sustains. And then the female, the older female or retired female, doesn't have very much, like $300 or $400. And now when you need to use Medicaid, that $1,000 that dad was getting every month goes to paying for his long-term care first. He gets $50 out of that, and then would have to use another source, i.e., money out of pocket or be eligible for Medicaid. It's very complex. And when you are in the throes of caring for someone you love, like many of us have been, the last thing you want to do is think about Medicare, Medicaid, insurance, like you mentioned, your home and who's going to be able to maintain the home. Um, these are big issues, and they can impact your life for a long time. And most caregivers are just not aware.
Whoa. Now, some folks, I know for the folks in the back, that just went way over your head. So I'm just going to break it down and make it simple. You can't have nothing because they're going to require that you deplete everything that you have to receive care. And so for those of us that are working, if your job offers some type of long-term insurance, that's something to look into. But also at the end of the day, you're so traumatized by the event of the family
Mhm.
member going into that long-term care situation that there's only so much you can mentally and physically handle. And it's not until you're in the situation that you really start to think about it. So you mentioned 100 days. So I'm just sitting here thinking, September 8th, I fell. September 8th, 2024, I fell. September 20th, I had surgery. I was non weight bearing all of that time. We have steps in our home. And so for 3.5 months, I was confined to my bedroom, not in a long term care facility, but to my bedroom. And my husband, who has a job where he has to travel 90% of the time, found himself in a situation where he had to care for me, and luckily he didn't have any travel during that time because he had just finished this big 1 year project. So this whole thing of him working full time, caring for me full time, I couldn't bathe myself. um I really couldn't go down the steps, right? Everything that I needed for my basic activities of daily living, he had to provide for me. And I watched him do this for all of these months. And the one thing that he loves to do, which is go outside into his tough shed, man cave, to have him a cigar and a little whiskey. He couldn't do it because he was afraid that I was going to fall. And so him working full time. And let's just face it, I love my husband. I love men. Men are generally not multitaskers, right? They're going to do
Mhm.
one thing at a time. So for him to have to go to a situation, which he did, right? I watched him where he's on his calls for work. He's upstairs. He's coming upstairs and he's like, okay, now listen, I got a call at 12 o'clock. Do you have everything that you need? Because I can't come back up here for another 2 hours, right? And so the self care part um, of his life was literally put on hold. And in your book, you talk about how self care is vital.
Yes.
to the well-being of a caregiver. And I just wonder if while this was all unfolding, if he was running on adrenaline and then at some point he just kind of like fizzled out, because I saw him be on, and I kept saying, you can go out there, like you just going outside into the backyard, right? It's gonna be okay. And he's like, no, I'm not leaving this house. So talk to us a little bit about well-being of caregivers and why you put it at the front of the book instead of the back of the book, because we're talking about caregivers, but you're talking about well-being from the jump. Why is that?
Well, I'm going to share a little something with you to confirm that we are kindred spirits. I had to have a neck surgery for my cervical spine in on November 11th. And my husband had to take care of me for the past 3 months. And I'm now just back up and moving around because I had to have so many of my vertebrae basically replaced. And so I just had the same exact experience. So I put well being, wellness, stress relief, self care at the very beginning because nothing is more important than taking care of yourself. And I think that we try to um, remind caregivers of that, but if you don't start off with that mentality in the front or at the beginning, then you can wait way down to the end of the book and then start talking about it, and that is not what we want. We want you to be taking care of yourself, because the more you can care for yourself, the longer you can care for your loved one, and just because you're important too. Yeah.
Wow, you know what? So I would say the last maybe 20 years, that word self-care is just like in the forefront of everyone's minds. And I think back, here I am, 52. I've always done something for me because I realized how important I was to everybody else. And I can't be important to them if I don't take the time to care for myself, right? You know how they talk about you're pouring from an empty cup?
Yes. Yes.
So I think one thing that really forced me into self care was 33 years ago. I gave birth to a little girl, Jasmine, who is special needs. And so she was at home for me for the first 7 years of her life. And I sacrificed a lot during that time frame. And I think once I made the decision that I could not care for her at home anymore. I needed her to be with professionals. I think from that point I dropped her off. I started making sure I'm taking care of self. And I think people say, okay, self-care, that's like your hair and your nails. And while that is a form of self-care, for me, I want to sit and cuddle up with a good book,
Mhm.
with my cup of hot tea, with no distractions, and just literally be in a peaceful, restful state, as opposed to this on the go version of myself that, is constantly in play. So I really believe it's intentional to really be, to really care for yourself at a level like never before. Like, right, making sure that you wake up every day thinking about how am I going to take care of me so that I can take
Mhm.
care of everyone else.
And it does make a difference if you're intentional. I went to the nail shop a little while ago, maybe 2 months ago. Well, it couldn't have been when my first visit back to the nail shop. I'm back there. I'm having a great time. Um, and I see a lady come in, and I kid you not, she was getting her nails and toes done. She had a laptop, she had a phone, and she had a second phone. And so while she was getting her nails done, she's typing with one hand on the laptop, and she's picking up and looking at a phone. And I just thought, Wow. No actual acknowledgement of um, or consciousness that you need to unplug. And I thought, man, if I could have snuck a picture, because she had her back to me, I would say, what do you think of this? But that's what we sometimes look like. And then to others, and then we find that we're burned out. And once you're burned out, there's really not a whole lot of coming back from that. So it's really important to do the things for yourself and maintain those. And I do agree with you. It's very difficult for to get your husband, my honey, to go and do something for himself. I feel like sometimes I nag about those things, but it's like, go get your massage, um, or go, you know, watch someone play basketball, or go play your game that you have with the guys, so that you can take care of yourself, because you're doing so much for everyone. And it's very rare that he would say no. But I do think that, again, with having had the surgery and having to be in a similar situation where you can't lift your hands over your head to take your own shower or change your clothes or cook or just basic things, gives you an appreciation for both the individual that is being cared for and the person who takes the time to be present for you and care for you.
Absolutely. And let me just say, it got real personal up in here. I mean, down to the fact of this is like, you probably gonna say, what? So he would, be washing all the clothes, and he was like, "How you need more underwear?" I'm like, "What?" He's like, "You don't have enough underwear." I'm like, "Well, when I quit my job, I cut back on, things to be in the entrepreneurial space." So he talked about me so bad. I took out that phone and I was like, "Let me order about 50 pairs of underwear," because it got real personal, but also it put me in such a vulnerable state,
Mhm.
one that I really would have never thought I was going to be in until it actually happened. But I'm grateful for the experience because it gave me a different outlook on life. So, and we spent some time going to the surgeon, and there was that whole dynamic with the surgeon and the staff. And in the book, you talk about, and a lot of people don't really realize the importance of this, that patient doctor relationship. Why is that so important?
Oh my word. It is really important. It is really, 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 really important, because I feel like in this space, I've had a couple of incidents this year with our 2024 with my personal health, with my knowledge level of what is being done and what's being talked about, and still not being heard as a patient. And so, what I want to encourage folks with in that section and in their life is that if it doesn't sound right, if you're not getting the right answers to your questions, if the doctor is moving too fast, first thing, schedule a consult visit. During a consult visit, you don't go through the whole head to toe thing that your doctor will do with your blood pressure and all of that. You simply go in and you sit with that doctor for that 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and you ask your questions. I have had to do that a couple of times this past year in 2024, even with the knowledge that I have, because doctors will talk over you. They may not listen to the fact of what you're feeling, your pain. You're going to be walking around with the pain unaddressed. They're not, they can't feel it, or unanswered questions. And so I'm always going to say, schedule that consult visit. And there are some things in that chapter about communicating with your doctor about how you can take control of your health care. If you do not get the right answers, or have your answers to your questions, then you need to find another doctor. And I had to do that in order to even get the thing with my neck diagnosed, because the doctor I had previous was just giving me medication and then we're just chasing it. And finally, to know what was going on. And then I had to sit down with the new doctor and have a consult visit and bring in my husband, so that, because sometimes when you're the patient and you're not used to being the patient, you hear things differently than the third party. It doesn't absorb the same. So having that second party to say, now what did he say again? So that you can process it that way. So very important. I really want you to if you take nothing else, we're talking about some really important things, but taking charge of your healthcare starts with taking charge of the doctor or nurse practitioner that you're working with and getting answers to your questions.
Absolutely. And for those of you who have been watching 52 Authors, 52 Weeks for the last, year and a half now, you may recall December 2024, we had a guest author on, Dr. Ann Hester, who wrote a book, Patient Empowerment 101. And in that book, she really talks about how you can be intentional about your visits. And for me, my process starts with writing down how I'm feeling, what I need, so that I have it in front of me during the visit, so that I'm not just off the cuff trying to have a conversation. I am very clear on what's been going on. But additionally, I also, and this could be because, I started in healthcare as a medical assistant and have looked at medical records for the last 30 years. I believe it's important that I have my stuff together when I sit down so that I don't get off a track, right? So they're about to walk out the door and I'm like, hold up. I got one more thing. And right, and that's not how I say it, right? But I I start my conversation out by more or less being in control by saying, I have three things that I would like to discuss today. I
Mm-hmm.
convey that to the medical assistant. I have it written down. I have, um, if I've had labs or anything else that's been going on, I take the time to write it down before I get to the visit, because during the visit and after the visit, you're like always behind, so you got to start off by being ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I just think it's so important too with caregiving things. You need to know that there is intention there for you to write in the book. I also would say sometimes it's really hard to get siblings, family members involved. There's a section on creating a caregiver action plan and the team. And I like that section. We use that with my husband's parents when we cared for them. We use that process because everybody's spiritual gifts are different as it relates to caregiving. And so someone may be more comfortable with the cooking part. Someone may be more comfortable with the personal care. I have no problem doing that. My husband is more comfortable with the paperwork, the finances, facilitating, and those are his spiritual gifts as they relate to caregiving. And so, if you can get your family members sitting down talking early on, then you'll also enhance the longevity of the person who's the primary caregiver, because number one, we've already started with self care. Now we've got a good financial plan, and then we're pulling in siblings and other people, services that can help for that, should it be a long term need.
Yes. So what you just highlighted was the importance of collaboration. You don't have to do this alone. You also alluded to this, but I'll call this out. You may not be able to do it alone. So, what can you outsource to
Mhm.
help um, fill the gap? But then also, and this is the part that I think we don't want to talk about, are the legal and financial
Mhm.
matters, because it just seems so morbid to have a conversation about it. But honestly, when you're in the midst of the transition from one state to the other, to me that's the wrong time to have the conversation.
It is absolutely the wrong time. It's so important. And one of the things that I try to do when I'm having these conversations, because you are talking about parents, and so that we're still kids. When my dad passed away a few years ago, but and the biggest transition for me this last couple of years is even when I was in my late 40s, I was still the baby. And then when he passed, then now I'm not, no one else calls me the baby. And so that's a hard transition. But you don't want to talk about finances in when and you probably won't still have time to figure that out at that time when there is a tremendous need. And so it's one of the ways I approach that is to say, it would help me tremendously if we discuss this now, so that when or if you need care, I can do a really good job because I'm going to know these fundamental things. And you could write that stuff in your book that you keep, the caregiving things you need to know. You could write that stuff right in that book, and then you can give it back to your parent and say, well, here it is, here, and when I need it, I'm going to know it's here. And we'll just keep adding to that so that you have at least a foundation.
Who you need that foundation. I'm just reminded of my grandparents, who my grandfather at the time of recording this episode is 104 years old. And I watched, luckily my grandparents had 6 kids, right? So I watched them literally jump into caregiver role. And luckily, it was almost like, my grandparents got older, so their kids started into retirement. And so they literally were just taking care of them effortlessly. Um, and I'm like, they got to be tired. But I guess, if you're retired, there's, a group of you, you're getting it done, you just do it. And my aunt, who I call the primary caregiver now of my grandfather only, her my uncle and my aunt, they come over, like the 7 days are covered, because my aunt Phyllis is gonna leave the house to go get her Coca-Cola and to go and get, whatever she wants to eat, some popcorn or whatever the case may be. But I watched that collaboration, that dynamic, and I'm also seeing them talk about things that I felt like we were younger, they didn't talk about, because I guess it was like something that you didn't talk about. But I see them talking about, finances and wills and all of that. And it makes me proud to see them have those conversations. But it's so many people who don't have those conversations. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you're going to struggle to take care of your loved one. And if you want your loved one to have that good quality end of life care, I call it, dying with dignity,
Mhm.
um, you're going to struggle.
Yes, you're
So,
absolutely going to struggle. Yep.
so I notice that you have a YouTube channel.
Mhm.
Talk to us about what's going on with the YouTube channel. I see you have some courses on there, or links to courses. So tell us about your services and where our listening viewing audience can find you.
Absolutely. So the best place to go is caregiver support services.com. And we have a variety of services that include training for caregivers. Our newest introduction that we've just done in the last week or so is soft skills for caregivers. So I say people tell you to be patient, but no one tells you how to be patient. And so these courses cover things that caregivers may need to know about, being patient, being kind, what that looks like, but also how to do that with also setting boundaries and such. And then we also have memberships that focus on the well being of caregivers. And of course, the books are there in the bookstore.
Oh, I heard you say books with a S. So I know we're talking about caregiving, but please just briefly introduce the other books that you have. I love how you have the same color scheme in terms of the cover, but there's a couple more books that you have that I think that our listening viewing audience need to know about, especially the Reflections from the Soul.
Yeah. So, Reflections from the Soul is about grief and walking through grief, and how you can care for yourself during that grieving process. I think you have to be ready to receive what's offered in the book, but I really made it like it was a conversation between me and someone who's grieving, and what that would look like for me to hold your hand as you work through your sadness. And I've come to understand that even more, like I said, with my dad passing a few years ago. The other book is, which is dedicated to my dad, is The Seven Pillars of Successful Caregiving, and that looks at the foundational skills that caregivers would want to have. Starts with self care in a different way, too, but self care being number one, so that you don't burn out, and then seven other pillars, and then the how tos, how to work with your loved one if they're angry, how to, if someone's depressed and you're going in, what can you do so that you're keeping a good relationship and not feeling overwhelmed with, I don't know how to talk to my loved one because, or my client, because they're grieving, or they're angry, or they're isolated, or they're depressed, those types of things.
Oh my God. You know how they say that you are in alignment with your assignment, that you're walking in purpose? I can tell that this journey is something that not only that you're passionate about, but it's something that you are supposed to be doing. And you've dedicated a large portion of your life, like from 98 to present, 1998 to present,
Mhm.
towards this caregiver movement. And you know how they talk about the baby boomers are getting older, they're retiring. Those are our parents that we're caring for.
Right.
And we need tools to navigate that so that we can, again, take care of them, but also still maintain our own dignity.
Exactly, exactly, and I do feel like that. I really appreciate, I actually feel very touched by what you said about, um, this being part of my assignment, or being a large part of my assignment, because I do feel that. And I also feel like it's the prime time to talk to our peers. I'm 51, um, and to know that they're needing to understand this process, and that we may have more than one caregiving situation, and that that's going to be different, but that we're going to be here to support you through that journey.
Oh, and we need it. Are you a 1973 baby?
74,
74.
January
Okay.
of 74. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're a year behind me, but us early 70s babies, we doing big things.
We are doing big things.
Well, listen, it has definitely been such an honor to have this conversation with you. I find myself a little emotional about having this conversation, and I hope that others will realize how important it is. And I really would like to see a book club, young women, maybe in their 30s and 40s. It may seem boring to them, but you just never know when something is going to happen to suddenly change your path.
Yeah.
And that fall for me, that sudden fall, and the noise that I heard when I fractured my ankle really solidified for me what the word suddenly actually means. Like growing up in the church, you hear about it in the Bible, but to experience it is something else.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely is. Yeah.
Well, everyone, um, This has been another amazing episode of 52 Authors, 52 Weeks. I've just been chatting with Dr. Eboni Green, author of the book Caregiving, the things that you may not want to know, but you definitely need to know today. And so I hope that you all will go out and grab your own copy and really start to have the conversation. As uncomfortable as it may be, you need to have the conversation now to prevent your future self from having some drama that you might not be able to deal with.
Truly, truly. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great